So, in the front yard of my parents' house, there is a red bud tree. In the spring, it produces beautiful purple flowers, and when you turn the corner onto the street, it grabs the attention of your eyes. It almost looks as if the purple flowers were strung on the branches, similar to how a tree would look strung with Christmas lights. It is captivating and appears full of life. Nearly no one knows that the tree is dying. It appears perfectly fine. However, last winter, Michigan had a brutally cold bout of weather followed by a blizzard. The winds were so strong that a major branch fell off of the tree. When my dad went to clean up the branch, he noticed that a pretty significant portion of the tree trunk is rotted out. As we all know, sometimes things are not as they appear. In the book of Kings, we read about some of God's prophets. One of these prophets is the prophet Elijah. Elijah's ministry was mostly based around exposing false prophets and false gods. God instructed Elijah to mentor another prophet, and this prophet is named Elisha. In the scripture we will be looking at today, Elisha is with a group of men referred to as the company of the prophets. This seems to refer to a community or school of those who serve the Lord. While with these men, Elisha makes them some stew, and some unexpected things happen in the process. 2 Kings 4:38 through 40. Elisha returned to Gilgal, and there was a famine in that region. While the company of the prophets was meeting with him, he said to his servant, "Put on the large pot and cook some stew for these prophets." One of them went out into the fields to gather herbs and found a wild vine and picked as many of its gourds as his garment could hold. When he returned, he cut them up into the pot of stew, though no one knew what they were. The stew was poured out for the men, but as they began to eat it, they cried out, "Man of God, there is death in the pot," and they could not eat it. I bet you are wondering why this servant would put something into the stew that no one knew what it was. That's what I wonder the most when I read this passage. But maybe some of you have eaten something that was a mystery to you. When I was home for my graduation, my older brother brought some morel mushrooms to my parents' house that he had found in his yard. Though we grew up hunting morel mushrooms with my grandpa at his cabin, I was still a little concerned that what my brother found were not actually morels. It is so dangerous to eat something when you don't know what it is, especially an unidentified mushroom. There are some other mushrooms that look similar to and are mistaken for morels, like the Verpa bohemica and the Gyrometra. The Verpa bohemica is poisonous and has the ability to cause stomach aches. Meanwhile, the Gyrometra is highly poisonous and can cause your red blood cells to rupture, which can result in kidney failure. However, you need to eat the Verpa bohemica raw or in large portions for it to be dangerous. Gyrometras are also poisonous when raw, but unlike the Verpa bohemica, some species of the Gyrometra are still unsafe to eat even when cooked. So while I am sure my family and I did not eat a Gyrometra, I'm not 100% confident that we didn't eat a Verpa bohemica. In the hill country where Gilgal is located, there is a common plant called the Cucumis prophyterum. When this plant is green, it is sliced and boiled as a vegetable. It is possible that this is what the servant thought he was putting into the stew. However, in the plains near Gilgal, there is another plant that is very similar looking to the Cucumis prophyterum, called the calocynthus. When cut open, the gourd's pulp dries up quickly and a powder is formed. The powder produced by the calocynthus is used as a medicine to soften stool. It is described as having a bitter taste, and if it is eaten in a large quantity, it can cause colic, which in adults manifests as recurring stomach pain or it can be fatal. Though the servant didn't know that he was putting something harmful into the stew, what came of this seemingly harmless ingredient was just the opposite of that. I would presume that the powder dispersed through the broth of the stew, changing the taste into one that was bitter. The men in this passage noticed that their stew had been poisoned by its taste and called out to Elisha that there was death in their pots. In the case of the men in this passage, their taste buds alerted them to the problem, and they stopped eating the stew before it could enter their stomachs and harm them. When we are eating, it can be easier or harder than other times to tell if there's something off with our food. I know I have either spit out food when something tastes off, stopped eating after swallowing a bite or so that tasted weird, or even continued to eat, hoping that there was nothing actually wrong with my food. There are other cases in which your food may taste great, but it ends up giving you food poisoning. Can you think of any moments like this in your own life? The one that comes to mind for me is when I pulled some pepperoni out of the refrigerator in the dark and popped a piece in my mouth as I walked out of the kitchen. It tasted so weird and gross that I knew something was off. So I turned on my phone's flashlight and inspected the other pieces of pepperoni that I had in my hand. What I discovered was that they were all covered in mold. I spit out what was in my mouth, and I brushed my teeth and used multiple rounds of mouthwash, then proceeded to scour the internet about what happens when you accidentally eat mold. When we look at the things that the world is teaching us are good, are we able to notice what is not good in the eyes of the Lord? Do we make sure that our minds or our pots are not being swayed by glorified sins? There are some sins that are more noticeable or obvious than others to spot. It is easy to proclaim that these are sins and to stay away from them. Different things may be more or less noticeable to each person. My fiance is a super picky eater, and he's pickier than I am, which is hard because I'm pretty picky. When I was home for my graduation in May, we went out to eat with my mom. My fiance got chicken tenders, and my mom and I split fajitas. When he went to eat his chicken, he didn't like how it tasted and thought something was off, so he stopped eating it. So I had him try some of the fajita chicken. He did not like the flavor and stopped eating that as well. I thought the fajita chicken was a little off, but continued to eat it, and I tried his chicken as well, which seemed off to me too, so I didn't eat that. Sometimes sin is like this. There may be something in your life that you have started doing or have been exposed to and then stopped doing because you realized that it was sinful. We may give the sin a chance to be in our lives and then notice that it is affecting us more than we thought. Sometimes another may rave about something and try to get us to try it, and we may give in, whether we know at first if it's bad or not. What level of discretion do you have when it comes to the masked sins of the world versus the goodness of God? I am, self-admittedly, a pretty bad cook. I tend to burn most things or add too much or too little seasoning. I know the basics of what I am doing, but I always go wrong somewhere. For example, every single time I make mac and cheese, and I mean the boxed kind, it tastes different because I do something wrong each time. I do not even notice that I am making these mistakes because they are so small, but it is noticeable in the taste of the final dish. But despite the taste being off, I eat the mac and cheese anyway. Sin is tempting, and the devil is well aware of this. It can be easy to indulge in a sin even when we know it is wrong. The devil whispers in our ears that sinning is okay and good. And with or without knowing that it is him, we can give in. We can tell ourselves that what we are doing is not that bad and list all the sins that we refuse to participate in to justify ourselves. But let me tell you that even one sin is too dangerous to gamble with. One sin can suck you into a world of other sins. Oops. One sin can suck you into a world of other sins, a world of hiding and hoping no one notices, a world of darkness, missing the light of God. My dad has gotten food poisoning quite a few times. When he was eating, the food appeared and tasted fine, but hours later, his body noticed something that his senses did not. There are some things in the world that appear good, things that culture promotes, things that we are told if we believe differently, then we are the bad ones. When we live in the truth of the culture, we may believe that we are living right. But this is not always the case. We need to evaluate what culture says based off of what God says. We may believe something in culture is right, and we may live in those ways, not knowing that they are affecting our pots. Most of you know that I had C. diff earlier this year. Something I did not expect to happen was that my taste buds would be changed, either because of the C. diff, the antibiotics, or the probiotics. All I know is that since then, nothing has tasted how it used to taste. This makes it difficult to discern whether food is okay or not. When we enter the church, ask God into our hearts, and become Christian, our taste buds change. We can tell when something in our pot is bitter, but the flip side is true as well. When we enter into sin, we get used to the bitter taste, and it does not bother us anymore. Is there anything in your life that is affecting your taste buds, affecting your ability to discern what is good and right from what is sinful? Thankfully, this passage does not end with the poisoned pot. 2 Kings 4:41. Elisha said, "Get some flour." He put it into the pot and said, "Serve it to the people to eat," and there was nothing harmful in the pot. Elisha knew what to do so that God could perform a miracle through him. Elisha put flour in the pot of stew, and God used that flour to purify the pot. There is no reason that flour alone could have taken the poison out of the stew. It was only God who could do this, but God used Elisha for that job. However, I want to note that this miracle would not have happened if the men did not notice and did not bring attention to the death in their pots. Do we even notice when there is death in our pots? Are we just putting flour in our pots and hoping that it masks the poisonous white powder that it blends in with? We can be attending church and going through the motions of being Christian, but without God's purifying work in our lives, then nothing is going to happen in regards to eliminating the sin in our lives. When there is sin in our lives, we must first notice that it is present, and then we must confess this sin. When we are able to do these things, God can and will purify our lives. He will set us apart for his purposes and his duty. God calls us to make disciples. When we go from this building out into the world, into the culture around us, we must be able to discern what is God's will. God used Elisha to help the men in the passage, and he wants to use you to help those in your life. When we proclaim God and live lives of love, that has the power to help bring others to Christ. God wants to not only purify your heart and your mind, but also the hearts and minds of others. This is for sure. When we recognize the death in our pots and truly ask God to purify our lives, he surely will. Rob is going to come up and give you your benediction.